knew something was off when I walked into the Thursday strategy sync, and my badge didn't work on the meeting room door. 34 years at that company, 34 birthdays remembered by HR, 34 winters where I was the one shoveling the front walkway before anyone else arrived. And suddenly I'm locked out of my own damn meeting. No warning. No email. Just a cold red blink on the card reader, like I was some temp who wandered in off the street. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, too stunned to speak, until I heard muffled voices inside. Laughter. My laughter used to echo in those rooms. Now it was him. Dylan. Dylan, the smug little VP they pulled from some startup like a rabbit out of a hat. All jawline and buzzwords, no spine. He'd only been here 6 months and already slithered his way into my meetings, my presentations, my staff. Just observing, he'd say, flashing that white-toothed smile like it came with stock options. Want to understand how legacy systems run before I start implementing some agility? I should have known right then. Nobody says legacy systems like it's a compliment. When I finally got into the meeting, someone cracked the door open without making eye contact. Dylan was standing at the front of the room with my printouts in his hands, talking through my Q3 risk mitigation model, like it was his damn science fair project. "Patricia here's been such a help," he said without looking at me. "Really laying the groundwork for where we can go next." And everyone nodded, smiled, avoided my eyes. Even Claire from procurement, who I'd helped get through a divorce and covered shifts for when her son had chickenpox, sat there scribbling notes like this was all normal. Now look, I'm not naive. I know what corporate succession looks like. I've trained 3 department heads, streamlined operations through 2 acquisitions, and navigated more budget seasons than Dylan's been alive. But there's a way to do it. With decency. With a handshake and a thank you. Not this sleight of hand. Not this slow erasure. Over the next few days, the signs stacked like receipts in a purse you keep meaning to clean out. Tasks I normally handled quietly got rerouted for efficiency. The Friday operations report went to Dylan first instead of me. My name disappeared from the Q4 planning board. When I asked Denise in HR about it, she gave me this brittle smile and said, "Oh, I thought we told you. You're being transitioned into a more supportive advisory role ahead of your retirement. Isn't that exciting?" Exciting? I hadn't even picked a damn cake flavor yet. I had 7 days left. 7. By the way, if you've made it this far, I just want to say, 97% of people listening to stories like this don't actually subscribe or like the video. It may not seem like much, but it really motivates the team that brings these stories to life. So if you're enjoying this so far, even if you're just hate listening with a glass of wine, hit that like button and subscribe. It means more than you think. Back to the mess. That weekend I didn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because of clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes after betrayal marinates in silence. I sat at my kitchen table, same one I bought after my divorce, still has a scratch from when I dropped a blender in '09. And I started digging. Through old documents. Off-site backups. USB drives that hadn't seen daylight since Bush was in office. I remembered something. A line from a conversation over 20 years ago. A moment most people would have forgotten, but not me. It was the beginning of something they all forgot existed. But I didn't. Monday morning, 9:07 a.m. sharp, Denise from HR asked if I had a quick SEC to chat. Never trust an HR meeting that's not on the calendar. I knew what was coming before I even sat down. Her voice had that chirpy brightness people put on like perfume when they're about to ruin your life. I took the seat anyway. Been doing that my whole damn life. Showing up, sitting down, holding my spine straight even when the building's on fire. She didn't even warm me up with small talk. Just opened a folder, slid a sheet across the table, and said, "We're restructuring your role ahead of your retirement to better align with modern needs." That's how 34 years ends. With PowerPoint jargon and a pre-printed letter. No mention of my 3 a.m. phone calls solving outages. No nod to the 2009 acquisition I made survivable. No thank you for the sleepless nights, Patricia. Just a reorg memo and a goddamn bullet list titled Next Steps. "I see," I said, because that's what women like me say when we're swallowing blood in our mouths. My hands didn't even tremble. My heartbeat didn't stutter. But I felt the edges of my molars grind together like tectonic plates. She kept going, all chipper. You'll technically retain your title through the end of next week, but we're asking you to hand off all essential functions by Friday, so Dylan can onboard cleanly. Dylan. Of course. Dylan, the digital savior. Dylan with the gradient LinkedIn headshot and 5-year plan written in hashtags. I asked about the retirement bonus. Denise paused just a second too long. So, technically, the policy states that bonuses apply to completed tenures. Since your last day of active duty is before the final retirement date, that portion is unfortunately forfeit. Ah. There it was. The technicality. A $62,500 farewell package vaporized because someone moved my last workday 5 days earlier. Not enough to bankrupt me, but enough to spit in my face on the way out the door. No problem, I said with a smile so tight it made my temples throb. Let's just make sure Dylan's fully briefed. I'd like to propose a formal transition document. Signatures, handovers, the whole nine. Wouldn't want anything falling through the cracks. Denise looked relieved, mistaking grace for surrender as HR's favorite blind spot. I walked out of that office like I'd just ordered a damn sandwich, not been gutted like a deer. My inbox was already redirecting project leads to Dylan. The welcome email from him was waiting in my trash folder. He'd CC'd the entire department. Excited to lead us into the next chapter, it said. Funny, the last chapter hadn't even finished. No cake. No speech. No, Patricia, you built this place. Just radio silence and the faint smell of Lysol from where they'd already disinfected my office chair. So I started packing. Not just my desk. Not just my plaque from the 2002 safety initiative or the photo of the first warehouse build-out. I started packing my real assets. Access keys. Credential logs. Copies of operational protocols they didn't know I kept on a local drive. The original disaster recovery binder I never digitized, because paper doesn't get wiped when you change CIOs every 6 months. And then I opened a drawer most of them didn't even know existed. The one behind the filing cabinet. The one with the manila folder so old it had yellowed at the corners and smelled like toner and revenge. Inside it, right where I left it 23 years ago, was the key. Not metaphorical. A literal key. Safety deposit box 211 at Fulton Trust and Reserve. Dylan had no idea what he'd just inherited. And what I was about to take back. That IT was 98 when the suits from Danton Consolidated came sniffing around. I was still wearing shoulder pads and perms, still smoking half a pack on the loading dock before sunrise. The company was smaller then, scrappy, lean, full of people who gave a damn because we had no other choice. We were 3 days away from losing everything. Danton had already started circling our clients like vultures, whispering buyout rumors to suppliers, sowing doubt. The founders, 2 brothers from Ohio with matching comb-overs and matching ulcers, called an emergency meeting in the break room, still smelling like microwaved fish and burnt coffee. They'd gotten a tip that Danton might trigger a hostile takeover through a shell bid. The lawyers were already on speed dial. One of the brothers, can't remember if it was Neil or Dale, they always blurred, slammed his hand on the table and said, "If they come for our house, we're making sure there's still a back door." That's when the fund was born. They pulled a chunk of pre-tax capital, about $2.7 million at the time, and parked it in a separate trust account through Fulton Trust and Reserve. No digital footprint. No company branding. Just a small, legally binding nest egg that could only be accessed with 2 things. A physical key and the authority of the trustee. And that trustee was me. They said it was because I was the only one who never panicked. The only one who didn't blink when payroll got tight or OSHA came calling. I called it what it was. Insurance against their own incompetence. But I took the key and the paperwork and stashed them where no one would think to look. Behind a fake panel in the cabinet, I bolted to the floor myself. When the Danton threat fizzled, the brothers got busy expanding. New facilities, new hires, shiny new leadership with MBAs and zero real-world grit. The trust got forgotten. Never digitized. Never logged in the asset sheets once the founders retired and sold partial stakes. New boards came and went. New protocols layered over old ones. But the account? It sat there untouched, growing. The interest alone added 6 figures by 2009. And every year or so I checked. Quietly. Logged into Fulton's terminal using a hard-coded key fob they gave me when Windows 95 was still a thing. I'd print the quarterly statement on thick ivory paper, hole punch it, and slide it into a binder labeled petty cash. No one ever asked. No one ever looked. In a world full of dashboards and Slack channels, people forget how powerful the old ways are. When I opened that drawer last week and held the key again, it felt heavier than I remembered. Maybe because now, for the first time, I actually needed it. Or maybe because it was finally time to use it, not as a last resort for the company, but as a lifeline for me. The woman they ghosted before her own goodbye party. The fund wasn't massive. Not anymore, not compared to the bloated valuation numbers Dylan was throwing around in investor decks, but it was clean, independent, and best of all, legal. Because technically the company never reclaimed it. Never restructured it. Never transferred trustee authority. It was still mine. I spent the next 2 nights going over every clause, every signature, every notarized scrap of it. I had the binder open beside a whiskey glass and a magnifying lamp like I was doing forensic surgery. Because I wasn't just looking for permission. I was looking for leverage. And I found it. Paragraph 14, subsection C. In the event that the acting trustee deems the parent entity to have abandoned strategic continuity, the trustee may initiate operational reassignment of said assets for fiduciary preservation. They'd forgotten I existed, but they'd left me a door, and I was about to walk through it. Dylan was late, of course. He swept into the conference room with his hair still wet from some overpriced downtown gym, holding a cold brew like it was a damn Emmy. "Sorry, traffic," he said. Even though we both knew his condo was 6 blocks away. He didn't bother sitting. Just leaned over the chair across from me, looked at the inch-thick transition packet I'd prepared, and gave me the kind of smirk you usually reserve for your barista when they spell your name wrong. "Wow, this is thorough," he said. I smiled. "Thought I'd make your life easier." The first 32 pages were the usual suspects: handover reports, infrastructure flowcharts, access logs, department summaries. All real. All necessary. I even formatted it in that glossy, minimalist style he liked. The kind that looked clean on a tablet screen, but buried the fine print like Easter eggs in the margins. Page 33? That's where the magic started. The appendix. Titled Operational Efficiency Delegations, Legacy Infrastructure and Non-Integrated Holdings. It sounded like something spat out of a legal thesaurus. I knew he wouldn't read it. People like Dylan never read past page 20. Not when they think they've already won. Buried in there, subsection 4.2 in polite corporatese, was the clause. Effective immediately, and for purposes of fiduciary streamlining, all oversight authority and disbursement permissions for legacy contingency assets shall transfer to Echelon Operational Holdings, LLC. Echelon was mine. Registered to a P.O. box in a sleepy township in northern Vermont. Dormant for 15 years, existing only in name. Until 2 nights ago, when I reactivated the EIN and appointed myself as managing partner. Technically, Dylan was agreeing to offload a forgotten asset into a third-party operational vehicle for audit compliance. What it really meant was that he just handed me $11 million. He didn't even pause. Just flicked through the packet with the disinterest of a man swiping left on a dating app. "Do I need to loop in legal?" he asked. Sipping his coffee like this was a favor to me. I gave him my best grandmother smile. "Already cleared. We just need your signature to finalize the internal structure." He nodded like he was being generous. Like I was some retiree he was tossing a bone to. Cool. He clicked his Mont Blanc pen, the one he bragged cost more than my watch, and signed on page 1. Page 9. Page 18. Then page 33. That pen may as well have been dipped in jet fuel. "Do I get a copy?" he asked, already halfway to the door. "I'll email it," I said. I didn't. The moment he left, I slid the signed packet into a fireproof envelope, dropped it into my personal courier box, and called Fulton Trust. Their line rang only once. "Ms. Harlan," the rep said. "Is this regarding the trustee reassignment protocol?" "Yes," I said, calm as a lake before a storm. "The reassignment has been executed. Echelon Holdings now assumes full operational jurisdiction." will initiate the asset migration. I hung up and stared out the window. Same damn skyline I'd seen every day for 3 decades. The cranes, the scaffolding, the half-finished tower Dylan kept promising would be our monument to the future. But the real monument? It was already built. And he just signed it over without reading a word. My last day didn't come with balloons or sheet cake. No awkward speeches from people who barely knew my last name. Just silence. A quiet, sterile Friday where my name vanished from the morning agenda. And nobody looked me in the eye by the espresso machine. It was fitting. After 34 years of keeping everyone else's chaos in line, I left them the one gift they couldn't fake, dignity. I arrived early like I always did. 6:15 a.m. The place smelled like printer toner and desperation. I emptied my drawers slowly, methodically, the way you'd pack up a crime scene. 3 framed certificates. 2 pairs of reading glasses. 1 stapler I never loaned out. I left behind every award they gave me, dusted off and lined up like headstones. Bronze plaques from 5 different CEOs, each one a different flavor of insincerity. At precisely 9 a.m., I placed a single USB drive in the center of my cleared desk. It was labeled in Sharpie, Policies. Inside were standard operating procedures, inventory audits, and disaster recovery scripts, the kind of infrastructure Dylan would one day pretend he invented, if he could even read them. I made sure none of it was critical, just enough to make them think I left the keys under the mat. I didn't say goodbye, just nodded at the receptionist, left my badge in the tray like a motel room key, and stepped into the elevator. The doors closed with a hiss that felt like punctuation. I didn't look back. But the real work began 12 hours later. That night, in my home office, I booted up a machine older than Dylan's career. No cloud. No AI integration. Just a cold, air-gapped Linux terminal blinking like a heartbeat. I entered the secure credentials I'd safeguarded since Y2K was still a punchline. Fulton's interface hadn't changed in decades, just blue text on black. No flair. No noise. That's why I trusted it. The trust fund was listed under its original name, Contingency Asset 1, Strategic Withdrawal Option, still sitting at $11,074,212.18, including 23 years of careful interest accrual. Untouched. Forgotten. Loyal. The reassignment clause I'd slipped into the appendix was already in their system. Dylan's signature had validated the transfer. Everything was ready. All I had to do was enter one command. Transfer entity. Echelon Holdings LLC. Confirm as authorized trustee? Y/N. I hit Y. The screen paused. Processing. Then the terminal gave a soft confirmation ping, like the sound a lock makes when it clicks open. That was it. In one keystroke, they lost their parachute. The emergency runway they didn't know they still had was gone. Folded into my LLC. Protected by legal firewalls they didn't even know to be afraid of. I wasn't stealing. Not legally. I was executing a reassignment under full authority. They handed me the trigger and assumed it was decorative. And I pulled it. I leaned back in my chair, glass of Macallan in hand, watching the status logs flicker. Every timestamp, every authorization, every handshake cryptographically signed and sealed. Bulletproof. Irreversible. By the time Monday came, they'd be standing in the wreckage of their own arrogance, trying to figure out which part of the floor had collapsed first. But me? I'd be on the porch. No titles. No chain of command. No more damn check-ins. Just the sunrise and a future they can't touch. IT hit them like a sucker punch before coffee. Monday, 8:41 a.m. Dylan struts into the war room with that idiotic confidence he wears like cologne, reeking of big moves and buzzwords. He'd scheduled an all-hands meeting to announce a legacy sunset initiative, whatever the hell that means, and planned to unveil a bold expansion plan to the board by noon. New software, new warehouse upgrades, a flashy PR campaign with fake testimonials already written. All built on one thing. The legacy trust he thought was just sitting there waiting to be cracked open like a piggy bank. He didn't even warn finance. Just opened the access panel on his sleek little company-issued tablet, typed in the old trust name, and waited for the balance to load. 0. Not low. Not pending. 0. He thought it was a glitch. He refreshed it 3 times. Same result. Z. No available funds. No transaction history. No ledger trail inside the finance portal. Just a single line where the balance should be. This asset has been reassigned to an external entity per authorized transfer. Dylan froze mid-sentence, his smoothie turning to condensation in his hand. The interns looked up from their laptops. The director of strategy squinted at the screen, thinking maybe this was some kind of onboarding simulation. Then Dylan's voice, high and tight, cut the silence. Where the hell is the money? Downstairs, finance was already trying to figure out why their asset sheets weren't reconciling. A dozen dashboards were redlining. The trust account ID was now returning a no entity found error. Treasury pinged legal. Legal pinged the external auditor. The external auditor, bless his overpaid heart, simply asked, "Who signed off on the reassignment?" That's when they pulled the records. It took less than 15 minutes to find the transition packet, the one Dylan had signed without reading. They opened the appendix, scanned the signature line, and the blood drained from their faces. There it was, clear as day. Dylan's blue-inked signature, right next to the clause authorizing transfer of stewardship for all dormant or undisclosed fiduciary holdings to Echelon Operational Holdings, LLC. Legal went pale. The controller started swearing in Polish. The board's secretary physically recoiled when she realized what it meant. They hadn't lost access to a minor backup account. They'd lost control of their entire emergency reserve. It wasn't just about the $11 million. It was about what that money meant. Operational liquidity, shareholder confidence, rainy day security. It was their safety net, their bargaining chip during quarterly bloodbaths. Now it was gone, slipped through their fingers because a smug VP wanted to impress the room and couldn't be bothered to read fine print. Calls started flying. External counsel, internal counsel, board members pacing their lakefront kitchens in silk robes asking, "What do you mean reassigned?" Dylan kept saying, "We can claw it back, right? Right." But every time they pulled the documents, every clause came back ironclad. Valid. Executed. Authenticated with his own signature and timestamp. And that's when disbelief turned to chaos. Because they hadn't just lost money. They'd handed it away, willingly, stupidly, with a Mont-Blanc pen and a grin. Upstairs, the marketing team started pulling back campaign drafts. Downstairs, the IT lead was instructed to track the domain for Echelon Holdings, only to find out it had been registered over a decade ago. Quietly, professionally, long before Dylan had ever worn his first blazer. And somewhere, between the legal babble and the silent horror of realization, someone whispered the words that sealed the mood for the rest of the day. Wait, was this Patricia's? No one answered, because everyone already knew. They brought Greg out of semi-retirement for this. Greg, the crusty old IT manager who still wore New Balance sneakers with slacks and spoke in grunts. The guy they gently transitioned 2 years ago when Dylan decided to modernize the tech stack by replacing half the team with a cloud consultant and a subscription to Slack Pro. But when every internal trail hit a dead end and legal started sweating through their silk, someone finally muttered, "Call Greg." If anyone kept backups of the legacy asset documentation, it's him. Greg showed up in his same faded company fleece, looking like he hadn't missed a beat. Didn't ask for a coffee. Didn't need a desk. Just plugged his personal USB drive into a workstation no one had touched since the COVID lockdowns and muttered, "Gimme 10. 9 minutes later he said, "Found it." He opened a backup directory dated 2003. Inside, the original contingency trust paperwork. Scanned copies of signatures. Transfer authorizations. One document labeled Trustee Rights, Operational Continuity V2. He opened it, scrolled silently, then leaned back in his chair like a man watching a slow-motion car crash. "Jesus Christ," one of the junior counsel whispered. Greg grunted again. "This is clean. Bulletproof." She didn't just take it. She followed protocol to the letter. The clause was already in place. Only thing Dylan did was approve the reassignment, which, he tapped the screen, he had full clearance to do. They brought in the boardroom team within the hour. Old white men in golf vests and inked notepads filed into the glass fishbowl one by one, murmuring like mourners at a wake. They passed the documents around in silence. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak. It was all there: the original 1998 trust agreement, the line of succession, and the most damning detail of all: the trust had never been formally reabsorbed into the company's general assets. There had been no board vote, no audit trail, no motion filed to bring it under central control. In the eyes of the law, it wasn't theirs. It never had been. That fund existed in a legal no-man's land, managed entirely by whoever held the trustee title. And as of 3 days ago, that title was owned by a woman they'd treated like furniture. A woman they kicked to the curb with no bonus, no party, and not even a farewell card. The chairman leaned back in his leather chair, face drained of color. "We didn't notice this during onboarding." Legal shook their heads hollow-eyed. "The account was too old. Legacy holdings weren't tagged in our current system. And," she paused, swallowing hard, "there was no obligation to report the transfer. We signed it over ourselves." Another board member muttered, "Why the hell didn't we audit this sooner?" Greg looked up from his terminal and said flatly, "Because she never gave you a reason to." And that was it. No lawsuits. No accusations. No loopholes. Just the cold, sinking realization that they'd lost their lifeline because they forgot to respect the woman holding the fuse. They didn't just overlook her. They gave her the detonator. It started with a headline: Midwest logistics firm quietly alters expansion plans amid internal asset reallocation. That was the polite version. The version written by someone with a cousin on the board and a mortgage to protect. But by Tuesday afternoon, the polite version gave way to whispers, then leaks, then full-blown investor calls demanding answers. The emergency runway was gone. Everyone knew it now. What used to be a financial cushion, a quiet reassurance on earnings calls and in crisis slides, had vanished, and no one could explain where it went without admitting they handed it away like Halloween candy. Dylan tried to contain it. Scheduled a series of internal all-hands meetings where he stood in front of bleached white PowerPoints and babbled about realignment opportunities and legacy optimizations. But his voice cracked. His posture wilted. And the questions kept coming. Where's the capital buffer? Why was a dormant account assigned to a private LLC? Was this a sanctioned move? No one bought the spin. Not even the interns. By Thursday, 2 of the major investors, quiet but powerful, requested a closed-door session with the board. The kind of meeting where phones are surrendered and NDAs get fresh ink. I wasn't in the room, of course, but I didn't have to be. The fallout spilled out in expressions, in movements, in digital silence. Dylan's profile photo disappeared from Slack by Friday morning. His account was deactivated pending administrative review. IT shut off access to his corporate email. The director of operations, once his biggest hype man, suddenly started citing personal reasons for missing meetings. And the staff? They whispered. God, did they whisper? Not about Dylan. Not anymore. He was just the cautionary tale. A blip. The real story, the one spreading through hallways, over happy hour beers, and in encrypted texts, was about me. The old woman who walked out like a ghost. No rants. No meltdown. No last-minute speech with teary eyes and trembling hands. Just a cleared desk, a final signature, and the quiet theft of their only parachute. I heard one of the warehouse coordinators said it best. She didn't leave. She evaporated. Took the oxygen with her. Even Claire from procurement, who hadn't spoken to me since she climbed the ladder Dylan built, sent me a message on LinkedIn. Just one line. You knew. All along. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat on the porch of a cabin I'd bought with my own name on the deed, watching the sunset settle over the lake. No alerts. No boardroom chaos. Just birdsong and the smell of pine. My lawyer had already confirmed the transfer to Echelon Holdings had cleared all checks. My entity was clean, independent, and flush with capital. I didn't need revenge in the form of lawsuits or headlines. This was colder. Sharper. They didn't even know how deep the wound was yet. But they would. Monday morning, the parking lot at HQ was already half full by 6:50 a.m., early even by damage control standards. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew what kind of day it would be. The lights in the executive wing were already on. Legal was holed up in a side room. The head of finance hadn't been seen since Friday afternoon, and now showed up with dark circles under his eyes and a laptop still blinking with flagged emails. At 8:03 a.m., the board filed into the main conference room. Suits crisp, tempers brittle. Every chair was filled. No coffee chatter. No pleasantries. Just a thick, anxious silence and the creak of leather upholstery as people shifted. A single agenda item on the screen. Asset Mismanagement Review. Emergency session. The head of investor relations opened with a shaky voice. We've had 9 inquiries in the last 72 hours. 3 are threatening to pull capital. We need to disclose something before next quarter or risk exposure. Someone from legal tried to soften the blow, dancing around the word negligence, like it had teeth. But it didn't matter. The board already knew. They weren't there to fix it. They were there to triage the carcass. Dylan's name came up exactly once, and even then, only as a cautionary footnote. His badge had been deactivated. His legacy scrubbed. They weren't talking about Dylan anymore. They were talking about me. And I wasn't there. I was 300 miles away, sitting on the porch of a small craftsman-style home nestled against the edge of a lake that doesn't show up on GPS, unless you already know it's there. I built this place slowly, weekends, holidays, late nights with blueprints and bourbon, just in case. My name was never tied to it publicly. Bought under a trust through Echelon. Quiet money, clean landmine. The coffee was already cooling in my mug. The air was just starting to shift from that early morning dampness to crisp fall promise. Out here, you don't hear car alarms. Just geese. And the occasional branch cracking under the weight of time. My phone buzzed once. A secure transfer confirmation. Fulton Trust and Reserve. Final fund migration complete. Echelon Operational Holdings now holds full disbursement authority. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about being seen. About knowing, in a way no plaque or award ever could, that I hadn't just kept that place running. I'd outlasted it. Outsmarted it. I was the disaster recovery plan. They just never figured that out until the disaster was themselves. I took a slow sip of coffee. No one cheering. No one clapping. Just the lake. The wind. And the rustle of trees older than any CEO I've ever met. They replaced me 7 days early. Turns out, I'd been preparing for that moment for years.